The Valari ships came out of the clouds one morning, silent and bright as moons. They didn't roar or flash. They just appeared, hanging over the oceans and cities, silver like mirrors, blocking the sun in a dozen places. The world stopped. Airplanes landed, traffic froze, and every camera on Earth turned to the sky. People waited for war, but the ships didn't attack. They only watched. In a control center deep under the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Eliza Hart stood before a wall of screens. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of cold coffee that she kept forgetting to drink. The message came again, echoing through every radio, every phone, every satellite link on Earth. A voice that was calm, too calm. It spoke in perfect English. Humans of Earth, submit peacefully, and you may live under Valari protection. Resistance will only bring harm. The same words over and over from every direction. Eliza turned to the man beside her, Commander Noah Briggs, head of the Earth Defense Network. He was older than her, his face lined from years of field work and too many impossible missions. He listened quietly, then crossed his arms. "They think we're scared," he said. Eliza gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let them." The other scientists and officers around them kept working, whispering updates, checking data. The Valari ships were holding position, 20 in total, but not firing. That was worse somehow. Waiting meant planning. Noah leaned closer. "How much longer?" Eliza took a slow breath. 2 hours. Maybe 3. The last drone is sinking. Noah nodded and looked up at the main screen. One ship hovered above the Atlantic, close enough that its shadow stretched across half the ocean. "They're not used to waiting," he said. "They probably think we'll panic." "Maybe most people will," Eliza said softly. "But not everyone." Deep underground, her team was working on something the aliens couldn't detect. The Valari scanners were powerful. Yes, they could see through concrete, metal, even radiation shields. But they didn't understand human unpredictability. They didn't understand that people could build weapons out of old satellite junk, or make artificial intelligence out of bits of stolen code and stubborn hope. The project was called Ghost Light. 1,000 small drones, invisible to Valari sensors, scattered across low orbit. They had no pilots, no voices, just one shared purpose: to protect their home. Eliza had started the idea years ago, back when the first deep space signals hinted that someone was watching Earth. Everyone laughed then. The idea of aliens seemed like something out of movies. Until now. Now her laughter was gone. On the screen, the lead Valari ship turned slowly. It was shaped like a long tear of silver glass. Light shimmered along its sides like water. Even from hundreds of miles away, its size was terrifying. One shot from that thing could melt a continent. Noah watched it in silence. "They're testing us," he said. "Seeing if we'll beg." Eliza shook her head. "We don't beg." Outside, the world's cities were filled with fear. Governments argued over what to do. Some wanted to talk. Some wanted to surrender. A few wanted to fight. But down here, beneath layers of rock and steel, there was only quiet purpose. Every person in the room knew what was coming. They had no idea if Ghostlight would work. The drones had never been used. But they trusted Eliza, not because she promised victory but because she believed in something stronger than that. She believed in human stubbornness, the kind that keeps people moving even when everything looks impossible. Noah walked toward the window that faced the mountains. He could see the faint glow of the ships in the sky, like stars that refused to move. "You ever think they might just leave?" he asked. Eliza thought for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "But I think they've already decided we belong to them. And you're going to prove them wrong," he said quietly. Eliza didn't answer. She just looked at the clock. The final synchronization code blinked green on her monitor. The last drone was ready. She set her cup down and reached for the comm switch. "Activate Ghost Light Standby," she ordered. The room fell silent. Lights dimmed. Every screen showed the same message: ready, awaiting command. Far above them, the Valari fleet began to move again, drifting closer, their shadows stretching over the planet like dark wings. Eliza stared up at the screen, her heart pounding. She knew what was coming next. "They think we're weak," Noah said quietly beside her. Eliza nodded, her eyes fixed on the stars. "Then let's remind them who we are." The Valari didn't wait long. They sent no warning, no second message. Only light. At first, people thought it was sunrise, a sudden golden glow stretching across the horizon. But then the sky turned white, and the Pacific Ocean began to rise, boiling into steam. From the control center, Dr. Eliza Hart watched the satellite feed. Her hands froze on the console. The screens flashed with wave patterns, then static. One by one the cameras went dark. The Valari had fired their first plasma beams. Not at cities but at the sea itself, a show of power. The kind that said, "We could destroy you but we are merciful." Whole coastlines shook. Earthquakes rippled through the ocean floor. People ran into the streets, staring up at the sky where the alien ships hovered like silent predators. Inside the command room, the hum of machinery drowned out every other sound. Technicians whispered updates, trying to keep their voices steady. Eliza didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the main screen. "How bad is it?" A young officer answered quietly, "Energy readings off the scale. They're not aiming to kill, they're just proving they can." Commander Noah Briggs stood beside her, his face pale but calm. He had seen war before but never like this. "They want fear," he said. "They think that's enough to break us." Eliza looked up, her voice steady. "Then they've miscalculated." She reached for the comm system. "Activate ghost light. All units." For a moment nothing happened. Then, deep beneath the mountains, the ground gave a soft vibration. Not an explosion but the awakening of something powerful. High above the earth, 1,000 invisible lights flickered to life. The ghost light drones, small, nearly weightless machines, came online, their signal invisible to alien scanners. Each one moved silently, adjusting its orbit, sinking into formation. In space, the Valari ships drifted in perfect symmetry. Their movements were elegant, like a dance. They didn't notice the ghost light drones slipping between them, weaving through the gaps in their formations. Then, without any warning, one of the Valari ships vanished in a burst of white light. No one on Earth understood what happened at first. There was no missile, no visible beam, no explosion pattern that made sense. It just blinked out of existence. Then another followed. And another. Inside the command center, everyone froze. The sound of static filled the room. Eliza stared at the screen. "Ghost light, is that?" Her assistant, a young engineer named Liam Cole, leaned over his console. "Yes, ma'am. They're active. Full sync achieved." A quiet, stunned moment passed. Then Noah let out a short laugh, more disbelief than joy. "Well," he said softly, "I'll be damned." One of the officers looked up. "Should we announce it?" Eliza shook her head. "No. Let them wonder." The Valari fleet began to break formation. Their ships moved erratically now, trying to track something that didn't exist on their sensors. The ghostlight drones moved too fast, too unpredictably, their patterns based not on logic but on random human behavior models. The aliens couldn't predict what they couldn't understand. Up in orbit, the Valari tried to communicate but their signals were jammed. To them it must have felt like fighting shadows. One of the alien ships fired a massive energy pulse, hoping to clear the space around it. The beam tore through empty void, and then the ghostlight drone struck again, their invisible payloads ripping through its hull. From Earth the night sky flashed like lightning. Each burst of light was another ship falling. In cities around the world people looked up in confusion. They didn't know what was happening but they saw something that gave them hope. The invincible enemy was bleeding. Eliza watched the data flood her screen, lines of code moving faster than her eyes could follow. She felt her heart race, her throat tighten. It was working. After years of secrecy, fear and doubt, it was finally working. Noah stepped closer. "You did it," he said quietly. Eliza shook her head. "We did it. Every engineer, every coder, every kid who believed we could fight back." For the first time since the ships arrived, she allowed herself a small smile. "They thought we'd kneel. Instead we learned how to stand." But even as she said it, she knew this was only the beginning. The Valari wouldn't give up easily. They would regroup. They would strike harder next time. Still, for one night Earth had something new. Not fear, but courage. High above, the last of the ghostlight drones blinked across the stars, invisible and untouchable. Somewhere out there the Valari fleet scattered in panic. Their perfect order was gone, replaced by chaos, the one thing humans understood best. Noah turned toward the big window overlooking the dark sky. "They'll come again," he said. Eliza nodded. "Yes. But now they know what we are." The Valari had been humiliated and they didn't take it well. Within hours of losing their ships to the ghostlight drones, they struck back with everything they had. The calm skies of Earth turned into a storm of light. It began with the satellites. One by one the eyes of the world went blind. The communication networks went silent, screens turned to static, and the maps that once connected humanity vanished into darkness. Then the power grids failed. Cities flickered, then died. From space, Earth looked like a dim blue ember surrounded by shadow. The Volari ships moved in lines across the atmosphere, leaving trails of burning plasma. They weren't attacking people directly, they were trying to erase hope, to make the world small again. But even without power, even without the sky, humanity refused to stop. In an old hangar in Nevada, a group of miners worked under flashlight beams. They weren't soldiers, just ordinary people who once dug metal out of the earth. Now they were welding parts of broken cargo ships together, turning them into something new, orbital bombers, patched up and unstable but built with determination. Their leader, Ethan Cole, wiped sweat from his face. "It doesn't need to fly pretty," he told his crew. "It just needs to fly once." Everywhere people were doing the same. In Germany, engineers used broken train rails to build launch tubes. In India, students rewired old rockets that had been sitting in museums. On small islands in the Pacific, fishermen loaded old weather balloons with improvised sensors and tracking beacons. No orders came from governments, they couldn't. Everything had gone dark. The fight had become personal, carried by people who refused to vanish quietly. Dr. Eliza Hart's underground command room was now lit by candles and battery lamps. The air smelled of metal and dust. The world above was falling apart, but her mind was clear. She watched her few remaining monitors. They flickered with weak signals from the Ghostlight network still holding in orbit. The drones were running low on power, but they were still alive, still protecting what they could. Commander Noah Briggs entered the room, his uniform scorched from a recent fire at one of the mountain outposts. "Half our satellites are gone," he said quietly. "We're cut off from the Eastern Hemisphere." Eliza nodded slowly. "But not beaten." Outside, the night sky looked wrong. Lines of red light crisscrossed the clouds like open wounds. But among the chaos, streaks of blue shot upward, the makeshift rockets of miners, engineers and dreamers. From space the Volari saw the pattern. Thousands of small launches, uncoordinated and unpredictable. They dismissed them at first as debris. Then one of the alien cruisers was struck by a mass of shrapnel so dense it shattered half its hull. Another followed, hit by what the aliens would later call metal storms. They couldn't understand it. To them, war was order, strategy, logic and structure. But humans fought like weather, wild, unplanned and everywhere at once. For every human life lost, 2 Volari ships fell. Ethan's patched cargo ship barely made it into orbit. It shook apart piece by piece, but before the end, his crew released a final wave of metal projectiles that pierced the alien shield system. When the ship disintegrated, its debris became a trail of tiny sparks that lit up the darkness. On the ground, people saw it and cheered. They didn't know his name, but they knew what it meant. Someone up there was still fighting. The Volari commanders grew frustrated. Their scanners picked up random signals, radio interference, fragments of human speech, laughter, even old songs broadcast through damaged transmitters. They tried to block them, but the noise kept coming. What they didn't realize was that those sounds were messages, coded directions sent to hidden resistance cells, guiding more human-made weapons into orbit. The chaos they heard wasn't confusion. It was coordination born from emotion, something no machine or alien mind could calculate. In Colorado, Eliza looked up at the static-filled screens. "They're adapting faster than we can track them," Noah said. "That's the point," she replied quietly. "They can't stop what they can't predict." A faint rumble shook the bunker. Dust fell from the ceiling. But Eliza didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at the stars through a small window in the control room's roof. They were dim now, blurred by smoke and atmosphere. Still they were there. "Broken sky," Noah murmured. "Maybe," Eliza said softly. "But it's still ours." Outside, the last functioning Ghostlight drones drifted through space like sparks from a dying fire, silent, stubborn, and unyielding. The Volari fleet, once a symbol of control, now flickered with damage and confusion. They had learned something terrifying, that humans didn't fight for dominance. They fought because they refused to be forgotten. And in the middle of the chaos, one thought echoed through every surviving radio, every whisper across the planet. "We are still here." Far below the frozen surface of Antarctica, something old began to stir. For years, it had slept in silence, buried under miles of ice and secrecy. The engineers who built it called it the Leviathan Array. No one had ever seen it fully powered. No one knew if it even worked. It wasn't meant for war, it was meant as a last message, proof that humanity would never bow completely. Dr. Eliza Hart stood in the control chamber carved deep beneath the glacier. Frost clung to the walls, and the air shimmered with cold. Around her, the remaining members of her team moved slowly, their breaths forming white clouds in the dim light. The entire world above them was breaking. The Valari ships now filled the upper atmosphere, blotting out the stars. Their flagship, larger than any city, was descending through the clouds like a silver storm. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the final sequence. "If this fails," she said softly, "there won't be a second chance." Commander Noah Briggs stood beside her, wrapped in a heavy coat, his face lined with exhaustion. "Then it won't fail," he said. "You've carried us this far." Eliza smiled faintly. "Hope isn't much of a power source." "Maybe not," Noah replied. "But it's the only one that never runs out." Above them the ice cracked with a deep, rumbling echo. The Valari flagship had reached the upper skies of Antarctica. Its engines burned bright blue, melting the snow in wide circles. A voice came through every remaining broadcast on Earth, cold and calm just like before. "Humans, your resistance is meaningless. Surrender now. We will spare what remains of your world." Eliza stared up at the monitor. "They still don't understand us," she whispered. Noah turned toward her. "Then show them." The words hung in the frozen air. For a long moment no one spoke. Every person in that room knew what activating the Leviathan meant. It was more than a weapon, it was a promise. Eliza placed her hand on the main control panel. The metal was freezing to the touch. "All power to core ignition," she ordered. The lights dimmed. Generators deep below began to hum, slow at first, then louder. The sound grew until the ice itself started to vibrate. On the surface, cracks spread across the glacier, glowing faintly with light from below, blue at first, then white-hot. The snow began to melt away, revealing enormous circular rings of steel, each one larger than the next. The Leviathan was waking up. The Valari flagship turned slightly, scanning the surface. It fired a test beam toward the ice. The beam hit the glacier and vanished, swallowed whole by the array's magnetic field. Eliza looked at the readings. "It's holding," she breathed. "It's actually holding." Noah leaned closer. "You have one shot, Eliza." She met his eyes. "Then let's make it count." The flagship began lowering again, its voice filling the control room one last time. "Your time is over." Eliza took a deep breath. "Fire it." A sound like thunder filled the earth. The ice split open as a column of pure light burst upward into the sky. It wasn't fire or plasma, it was energy drawn from the planet's molten core, focused through hundreds of magnetic rings. The light hit the Valari flagship directly. For a moment, everything went white. The sound vanished. The air itself seemed to freeze. Then, in complete silence, the flagship began to fade, not explode, not burn, just dissolve piece by piece until nothing was left. The sky went still. The light dimmed. The hum faded into the distance. Eliza sank into her chair, her hands shaking. The entire control room was quiet, except for the slow dripping of melted ice. Noah broke the silence first. "Is it over?" Eliza stared at the blank screen. "For now," she said. Outside the clouds cleared. For the first time in months, the stars shone over the frozen land. The Leviathan array went dark, its purpose fulfilled. People around the world looked up, confused but awestruck. The lights in the sky, the endless ships that once filled their nightmares, were gone. Only a few fragments drifted away, silent and harmless. In that quiet moment no one cheered. No one shouted. The world simply breathed again. Eliza stepped outside the bunker a few hours later. The air was sharp and cold, but she barely felt it. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're still here." Noah joined her, his voice low. "They'll come back someday." "I know," she said. "But next time they'll remember this." The wind howled across the ice, carrying their words into the night. Above, the last trace of light from the Leviathan faded into the stars, a quiet mark of defiance, glowing softly before disappearing into the dark. And in that silence the earth slept for the first time in a long while. Months had passed since the sky last burned. The world was slowly breathing again. Cities that once shone with electric light now glowed with small lanterns and campfires. The air was cleaner, the nights quieter. Life, fragile but stubborn, had begun to return. In the middle of what used to be Denver, children played among the half-rebuilt streets. They ran through broken buildings turned into playgrounds, laughing as the wind carried their voices up into the blue. Above them, pieces of old satellites drifted across the sky, some newly repaired, others just silver scars left from the war. The people called them the Guardians, bright dots that reminded everyone that even in ruin, the world still reached for the stars. Dr. Eliza Hart stood on the rooftop of a small observatory built from scrap metal and old research parts. Her hair fluttered in the cold wind as she watched the horizon, where the first lights of evening began to glow. She had changed. The sleepless eyes that once stared at battle screens were now softer, calmer. She still carried the memories of what had happened, but she no longer feared them. Commander Noah Briggs joined her, climbing the final steps to the roof. His uniform was gone, replaced by a worn jacket and gloves. He moved slower now, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders, but his voice was gentle. "They're fixing the power grid again," he said, looking down at the city. "It won't be perfect, but it's a start." Eliza smiled faintly. Everything starts small. They stood together in silence, watching as a group of children pointed at the sky. A satellite blinked overhead, its new solar panels catching the last sunlight. "They'll come back," Noah said after a while, his tone quiet, almost thoughtful. Eliza nodded. "Yes. The Volari don't forget easily." He looked at her. "And if they come again?" She turned her gaze toward the stars. "Then we'll remind them who we are. Not with anger. Just truth." Noah frowned slightly. "You still think they can understand us?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe they just need to see what they couldn't before." Below them, a radio tower flickered with power for the first time in months. The rebuilt communication systems were weak but alive, a fragile heartbeat connecting what was left of the world. Eliza reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small transmitter, a device the size of her hand. She held it like something sacred. "This is what's left of the Leviathan network," she said. "It's enough to send one final message." Noah raised an eyebrow. "A warning?" She shook her head. "No. A reminder." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke and snow. Eliza connected the transmitter to the old antenna beside the observatory. A low hum filled the air as the system came online. The signal rose, moving through the clouds, past the broken satellites, past the orbit where the ghostlight drones still drifted in silence. It reached the edge of space, where light met darkness, and then continued outward endlessly. Every few seconds the same pattern pulsed through the stars. "We are human. Come and see what we've become." The message wasn't angry. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement, steady, honest, and filled with quiet pride. Back on Earth, Noah listened to the signal repeat on a small speaker. "You really think anyone's out there to hear it?" he asked. Eliza smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Someone always listens. Even silence has an audience." As night fell, the observatory lights flickered on. Down below, people gathered in the streets, looking up at the stars. Some knew about the message, most didn't. They just felt that something had changed, the air, the quiet, the sense that the universe had noticed them at last. A child tugged on her mother's coat and pointed upward. "Mom, look. The stars are blinking." The woman smiled softly. "Maybe they're saying hello." Eliza stood at the railing, watching the night deepen. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "They thought we were weak," she said. Noah glanced at her. They were wrong. For a long moment, neither of them spoke again. The stars continued to shimmer, carrying humanity's message further and further into the dark. Not a threat. Not a cry for help. Just a heartbeat, steady and alive. And somewhere, across the endless distance of space, someone, or something, might one day answer. But for now Earth was quiet. The war was over. And for the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like an illusion. The wind settled, the lights dimmed, and the world, bruised but breathing, began to dream again beneath the unbroken sky.